A grieving husband attends his wife's funeral, but not with the sorrow you'd expect. By his side is his mistress, and on his mind is a fortune he believes awaits him in her will. But what he doesn't know is that his late wife had one final surprise, a mirror, not of wealth, but of truth. What happens when he's forced to confront the man he's become? This story of betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption will leave you speechless. Watch to the end to discover the extraordinary twist that changes everything. The late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of St. Luke's Hospital in Manhattan, casting a golden glow on the pale blue walls of Sophia Reed's room. At 34, Sophia had always been the picture of vitality, a dedicated teacher with a warm smile and a love for helping others. But now, the woman who once captivated a room with her enthusiasm looked frail and tired, her honey-brown hair long gone, replaced by colorful scarves gifted by her younger sister Claire. Sophia had been battling terminal cancer for months. The news had come as a devastating blow, but she faced it with remarkable grace. Her students visited often, bringing handmade cards and books to remind her of the lives she had touched. Claire, her steadfast support, spent every day by her side, bringing laughter and love to lighten the darkest moments. But there was one person missing in this picture of support: Daniel, Sophia's husband. Daniel Reed, a successful real estate agent, had been absent for most of Sophia's journey. He had mastered the art of excuses, endless meetings, late-night calls, and business trips that always seemed to coincide with her doctor's appointments. Sophia had learned not to ask anymore. The disappointment was too much to bear. Still, a part of her clung to the hope that the man she had married would show up when it mattered most. That day, as Claire arranged flowers on the bedside table, she glanced at her sister's untouched phone. "Has Daniel called today?" she asked, her tone betraying her frustration. Sophia shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he had an important deal to close." Claire set the vase down with a little too much force. "An important deal? More important than you?" She paused, her anger giving way to concern. "Soph, you deserve better than this. He's barely here when you need him most." Before Sophia could respond, the door opened, and Isabel entered. The new nurse carried herself with a confidence that felt out of place. Her tailored scrubs and perfectly styled hair seemed more suited to a magazine cover than the oncology ward. Isabel's presence was unsettling, though Sophia couldn't quite put her finger on why. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Reed," Isabel greeted with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Time for your medication." Sophia managed a weak smile in return. "Thank you, Isabel." As Isabel prepared the IV, Claire studied her closely. There was something off about the way she hovered near Sophia, almost too attentive. When Isabel adjusted Sophia's blanket, Claire noticed the faint scent of an expensive perfume, not something one would expect from a nurse working long shifts. After Isabel left, Claire turned to Sophia. "She's a little too polished, don't you think? And why does she keep asking about Daniel every time she comes in?" Sophia sighed. "She's just doing her job, Claire." But Claire wasn't convinced. The next day, when Daniel finally appeared at the hospital, Claire noticed how his demeanor changed when Isabel entered the room. Their eyes met for a fraction too long, and Isabel's usual professionalism seemed to slip into something more familiar. Claire's suspicion grew. Later that evening, she decided to confront Sophia. "Something isn't right. I think Daniel and Isabel know each other, and not in a good way." Sophia's exhaustion was evident, but Claire's words planted a seed of doubt she couldn't ignore. "You're imagining things, Claire. Daniel wouldn't—" She stopped herself, the unspoken doubts hanging heavy in the air. "I'm going to find out," Claire said resolutely. "You deserve the truth, Soph." The following week, Claire hired a private investigator, determined to uncover what Daniel was hiding. Days later, she returned to the hospital with a manila envelope in hand, her face pale with fury. She waited until Isabel left the room and then sat beside Sophia, gripping her hand tightly. "I didn't want to believe it," Claire began, her voice trembling. "But you need to see this." Sophia opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photographs of Daniel and Isabel dining at expensive restaurants, entering a luxury apartment building, and even shopping for jewelry together. The last photo made Sophia's heart sink, Daniel and Isabel kissing outside the very hospital where she was fighting for her life. "This isn't just an affair, Soph. Claire continued, pulling out more documents. Look at this. She handed over bank statements showing large withdrawals from their joint account. He's been spending your inheritance, money Aunt Margaret left for you, on her. The penthouse, the jewelry, the vacations, it's all your money. Sophia stared at the evidence, her face a mask of shock and devastation. Her mind raced through the past months, the excuses, the late nights, Isabel's overly familiar presence. It all fit together now, a puzzle of betrayal she hadn't wanted to see. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "How could he?" Claire wrapped an arm around her sister, her voice firm. "You're stronger than this, Soph. He doesn't get to win. We'll figure out a way to make him pay for what he's done." Sophia's sadness slowly transformed into something colder, sharper. Resolve. She wiped her tears and looked at Claire with a newfound determination. "I'm not going to let him get away with this. If he wants to live in his fantasy, I'll make sure it's one he never forgets." In that moment, Sophia Reed decided to reclaim the power Daniel had taken from her. She may have been running out of time, but she was far from powerless. A plan began to form in her mind, one that would ensure Daniel faced the truth of his actions and carried the weight of them for the rest of his life. Little did Daniel know the storm was just beginning. Sophia sat silently in her hospital bed, the manila envelope from Claire still clutched tightly in her hands. The damning evidence of Daniel's betrayal lay spread across her lap. Photographs of him with Isabel, bank statements showing the misuse of her inheritance, and receipts for luxury purchases she had never known about. Her once steady hands trembled as she sifted through the pieces of a life that now felt like a lie. Across the room, Claire paced restlessly, her anger barely contained. "He's disgusting, Soph," she said, her voice trembling. "How could he do this to you? To us?" Sophia didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on a photo of Daniel and Isabel standing close together outside a high-end jewelry store. Isabel was wearing an emerald necklace, Sophia's favorite stone. The irony stung, but it also ignited a flicker of something else inside her. Resolve. "I trusted him," Sophia finally said, her voice soft but firm. "I trusted him with my life, my future, everything." Claire stopped pacing and knelt beside her sister's bed. "You don't have to go through this alone. Whatever you want to do, I'm with you." Sophia met her sister's eyes, her own filled with a newfound determination. "He thinks he's won, Claire. He thinks I'm too weak to fight back. But he doesn't know who he's dealing with." Claire's face softened with admiration. "That's my sister," she said, squeezing Sophia's hand. "We'll get through this together." The next morning, Sophia contacted Mr. Carter, the family's longtime lawyer, and asked him to visit her at the hospital. When he arrived, his usually cheerful demeanor was replaced with concern. "Sophia, you're looking pale," he said gently as he sat beside her bed. "What can I do for you?" Sophia handed him the manila envelope, her jaw set with determination. "I need to revise my will." Mr. Carter opened the envelope and reviewed the contents. As he flipped through the documents, his expression darkened. "I can't believe he's done this," he said quietly. "Sophia, I'll make sure he doesn't get away with it." "I want to ensure that every penny goes to causes that matter," Sophia said, her voice steady. "The Cancer Research Fund, charities for single mothers, and education programs for girls. Daniel doesn't deserve a cent." Mr. Carter nodded. "Consider it done. But is there anything specific you want to leave him?" Sophia thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Yes, the mirror." "The mirror?" Mr. Carter asked, confused. Sophia nodded. "It's a family heirloom, but it's more than that. It's symbolic. I want him to see himself for who he truly is, every day, for the rest of his life." Over the next week, Sophia worked closely with Mr. Carter to finalize her plans. In addition to revising her will, she wrote a series of letters and recorded a video message for Daniel to be shared after her death. She poured her heart into every word, detailing the pain he had caused, the life he had destroyed, and the truth he had refused to face. In one letter she wrote, "Daniel, you've built a house of cards and it's about to come crashing down. The mirror I'm leaving you isn't just a piece of furniture, it's a reflection of your choices. I hope you learn to live with what you see." Claire watched her sister work tirelessly, worried about the toll it was taking on her already fragile health. "Soph, "You need to rest," she said one evening, as Sophia scribbled another letter. "I will," Sophia replied, not looking up, "but not until this is done. I need to make sure he understands what he's done." Amid all the planning, Sophia faced another unexpected revelation. She had been feeling nauseous and fatigued, symptoms she initially attributed to her treatments. But when the nurse confirmed her suspicions, Sophia was stunned. She was pregnant. The news was both a miracle and a heartbreak. The doctors had warned her that the chemotherapy would make conception nearly impossible. Yet here she was, carrying a fragile life inside her, even as her own body fought against her. When she told Claire, her sister was overcome with emotion. "Sophia, this could change everything." But Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's too late, Claire. My body can't handle this. The baby, it won't survive." Her words proved true just days later. Sophia suffered a miscarriage, the stress and her weakened body too much to sustain the pregnancy. The loss was devastating, but it also deepened her resolve. Daniel would never know about the child he had lost because of his actions. She would channel her grief into ensuring that he faced the consequences of his betrayal. By the end of the month, Sophia's plan was in place. The revised will was signed, the letter sealed, and the video prepared. Mr. Carter had agreed to oversee every detail, ensuring that Daniel received exactly what Sophia intended, and nothing more. On the surface, Sophia appeared calm, even at peace. But inside, a fire burned. She had little time left, but she would use every moment to ensure that Daniel could never escape the truth. As Claire sat beside her one evening, Sophia placed her hand over her sister's. "I don't have much time, Liv, but I'll make sure my voice is heard long after I'm gone." Claire squeezed her hand, her eyes filled with pride. "You're the strongest person I know, Soph. He doesn't stand a chance." Sophia gazed at the antique mirror resting on the small table beside her hospital bed. Its ornate silver frame, etched with swirling vines and delicate roses, seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the room. It had been in her family for 3 generations, a gift from her grandmother to her mother, and from her mother to her. The mirror, once a symbol of love and resilience, now held a far heavier purpose. She reached out, tracing her fingers along its intricate edges. "This mirror," she murmured to herself, "will be my voice when I'm gone." The next morning, Mr. Carter returned to the hospital, a stack of legal papers in hand. He placed them carefully on the table, sitting across from Sophia with an air of solemn respect. "It's all here," he said, gesturing to the documents. "Your will has been revised to ensure that your estate is distributed exactly as you wish. The charities, the research funds, everything is in place." Sophia nodded, her face calm but determined. "And the mirror? It's included?" Mr. Carter smiled faintly. "Yes, the mirror is specifically listed. It's to be given to Daniel, along with the letter you wrote." "Good," Sophia said firmly. She leaned back against her pillows, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "He needs to see himself, Mr. Carter. Not the version he pretends to be, but the truth." "I understand," he replied gently. "I'll make sure everything is carried out to the letter, Sophia." As the weeks passed, Sophia poured her remaining energy into preparing for the legacy she would leave behind. Every detail mattered. She wrote letters not only to Daniel but also to Claire, thanking her sister for her unwavering support, and to Mr. Carter, expressing gratitude for his kindness and dedication. For Daniel, however, her words were sharper, more deliberate. "Daniel, you've always prided yourself on appearances, the successful businessman, the doting husband, the charming socialite. But appearances are fragile, and the truth is far more resilient. This mirror will be your constant reminder of the life you destroyed. Not mine, but yours. I hope you have the courage to face it." The mirror wasn't just a family heirloom. It was a symbol of accountability. Sophia understood that material punishments, losing money or property, would sting, but they wouldn't change Daniel. He had built his life around external validation, and Sophia's plan was designed to force him to look inward, where he couldn't escape what he'd done. During one of their final sessions, Mr. Carter suggested a video message. "Sometimes, seeing and hearing you will have a stronger impact than words on paper," he explained. Sophia hesitated. I don't want it to come across as vindictive, she said softly. This isn't about vengeance. It's about truth. Then speak from your heart, Mr. Carter encouraged. Say what you need to say, the way you would have said it if he had ever bothered to listen. Sophia agreed. A few days later, with Claire by her side for moral support, she recorded the video. The camera captured her as she was, frail, bald from chemotherapy, but radiating an inner strength that defied her illness. Daniel, she began, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. It also means that you've received the mirror. That mirror belonged to my grandmother. She used to say it reflected not just our faces, but our souls. I hope you take a good, long look at yourself. She paused, her gaze unwavering. I loved you, Daniel. I trusted you with everything. My heart, my future, even my final days. But you betrayed me. You turned away when I needed you most. You took the inheritance meant to secure my care and squandered it on a fantasy with another woman. And worst of all, you robbed me of the chance to share something beautiful with you, a child we lost because of the stress you caused. Claire gasped softly at the mention of the pregnancy. Though Sophia had confided in her, hearing it spoken aloud was deeply affecting. I hope you see what I see, Sophia continued, her voice rising slightly with emotion. Not the charming, polished man you show the world, but the selfish, deceitful person who left his wife to die alone. The mirror won't lie to you, Daniel. It will force you to face yourself every day. And maybe, just maybe, it will help you change. The video ended with a faint smile. I loved you once, Daniel. I don't anymore. But I hope you find a way to become the man I once believed you could be. In the days following the video recording, Sophia felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. Her plan was complete. The letters were written, the will finalized, and the mirror prepared. All that was left was to wait. Daniel, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. His visits to the hospital grew less frequent, his excuses more transparent. When he did come, he spent most of his time on his phone, exchanging whispered conversations with Isabel. Sophia no longer cared. She knew that his indifference would only make the impact of her plan more devastating. One afternoon, Daniel arrived with a bouquet of roses, an uncharacteristic gesture that made Sophia suspicious. He sat at her bedside, feigning concern, and said, Sophia, I've been thinking about the future, about what happens after. She raised an eyebrow. After? He nodded, his expression carefully composed. I want to make sure everything is handled properly. The inheritance, the house, your medical bills. It's a lot to manage. Sophia fought back a bitter laugh. I'm sure you've been giving it a lot of thought. Daniel didn't notice the edge in her tone. It's what you'd want, isn't it? For me to take care of things? She smiled faintly, her voice calm. Yes, Daniel. I want you to take care of things. Don't worry. Everything is already arranged. Satisfied, Daniel leaned back in his chair, oblivious to the double meaning of her words. As Sophia's condition worsened, the mirror became a source of quiet strength. Every morning Claire would help her sit up, and together they would polish the silver frame, making it gleam like new. Do you think he'll understand? Claire asked one day as she buffed the surface with a soft cloth. I don't know, Sophia admitted. But that's not the point. The point is that he'll have to try. He won't be able to ignore it. Claire nodded, her expression fierce. He won't know what hit him. As the days grew shorter and Sophia's strength faded, she found comfort in the knowledge that her legacy was secure. The mirror sat on her bedside table, waiting for its moment to deliver the truth. This is your masterpiece, Soph, Claire said one evening, squeezing her sister's hand. It's going to change everything. Sophia smiled weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not about revenge, Liv. It's about justice. And maybe redemption. And with that, she closed her eyes, the mirror catching the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting the strength of a woman who refused to let her truth be silenced. The hospital room was quiet, the steady hum of machines replaced by an eerie silence. Sophia lay motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. Claire sat beside her sister, holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. The dawn light filtered through the window, casting a golden hue across Sophia's frail form. Claire squeezed Sophia's hand, her voice trembling. "I'll take care of everything, Soph. You don't have to worry anymore." Sophia's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Make sure he gets it." Claire nodded, understanding the gravity of her sister's words. "I promise." Sophia passed away peacefully that morning, her spirit leaving behind the pain and betrayal that had marked her final months. Claire stayed by her side until the hospital staff gently ushered her out. She clutched the antique mirror to her chest, its weight both literal and emotional, as she walked out of the hospital for the last time. Word of Sophia's passing spread quickly. Friends, family, and colleagues expressed their condolences, but one person seemed curiously detached: Daniel Reed. When Claire called to inform him, his response was a mix of obligatory sadness and thinly veiled impatience. "The funeral is in 3 days," Claire told him curtly, "at St. Thomas Cathedral." "I'll be there," Daniel replied, his voice devoid of genuine emotion. The day of the funeral was overcast, the sky heavy with gray clouds that threatened rain. The grand interior of St. Thomas Cathedral was adorned with white lilies and soft candlelight, a solemn tribute to Sophia's life. Friends and family gathered, their faces etched with grief and respect for the woman they had loved and admired. Daniel arrived late, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than his wife's funeral. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit and carried himself with the practiced composure of someone used to public appearances. Isabel, his mistress, trailed behind him, wearing a modest black dress and a strained expression. She kept her distance, blending into the crowd, but her presence didn't go unnoticed. As the priest spoke about Sophia's kindness and resilience, Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He dabbed at his dry eyes with a handkerchief, feigning sorrow, while occasionally glancing at his watch. Claire, seated in the front row, turned to look at him, her eyes burning with contempt. After the service, guests approached Claire to offer their condolences. Daniel made a half-hearted attempt to mingle, accepting the occasional, "I'm sorry for your loss," with a solemn nod. Isabel remained in the background, avoiding eye contact with everyone. 3 days later, Daniel arrived at the law offices of Mr. Carter, the attorney who had overseen Sophia's revised will. He strode into the conference room with his usual confidence, assuming the meeting was a mere formality. After all, he believed Sophia's substantial inheritance was now his to control. Mr. Carter greeted him with a neutral expression. Claire was already seated, her face impassive as she watched Daniel take his place across the table. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Reed," Mr. Carter began, opening a thick folder. "We are here to review the last will and testament of Sophia Reed." Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Let's get on with it." Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses and began to read. The initial bequests were modest: sentimental items to close friends, small donations to local charities, and a heartfelt letter to Claire thanking her for her unwavering support. Then Mr. Carter's tone shifted as he reached the main portion of the will. "Regarding the remainder of my estate," he read, "including the inheritance from my late parents and all assets accumulated during my marriage, I hereby direct that these funds be distributed as follows: a donation to the Cancer Research Foundation at Mount Sinai Hospital, funding for a new oncology wing named in my memory, and contributions to organizations supporting victims of betrayal and abuse." Daniel's confident facade faltered. "Excuse me?" he interjected, his voice rising. "What about me? I'm her husband." Mr. Carter ignored the outburst and continued. "To my husband, Daniel Reed, I leave 2 items. First, a letter to be read immediately. Second, the antique mirror that belonged to my grandmother, which holds special significance." Claire smirked, watching as Daniel's face turned pale. Mr. Carter handed Daniel a cream-colored envelope, which he opened with shaking hands. Inside was Sophia's final letter to him. "Daniel," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've come looking for what you think you deserve. Let me be clear. You deserve nothing. You abandoned me in my time of greatest need. You betrayed our vows and squandered the inheritance that was meant to secure my care. But this letter isn't about what you've lost. It's about what I'm leaving you. The mirror you've received isn't just a piece of furniture. It's a reflection of truth. Every time you look into it, I want you to see the man you've become, the selfish, deceitful man who chose his own desires over his dying wife, I hope it forces you to confront the reality you've tried so hard to ignore. Maybe, in time, it will help you change. Or maybe it will simply be a reminder of the life you destroyed. I loved you once, Daniel. But love without loyalty and respect is meaningless. I hope this mirror becomes the beginning of your redemption, though I won't be here to see it. Goodbye. Daniel's hands trembled as he finished reading. He looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This is ridiculous. She can't do this. She can, and she did, Claire said coldly. You have nothing left, Daniel. No money, no assets, no legacy. Just that mirror. You think this is funny? He spat, glaring at Claire. This is a setup. She poisoned you against me. Claire leaned forward, her voice icy. She didn't need to poison me, Daniel. You did that all by yourself. Mr. Carter cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. I suggest you take some time to process this, Mr. Reed. The mirror is waiting for you in the lobby. My secretary will ensure it is delivered to your car. Daniel stormed out of the office, the antique mirror wrapped in a protective cloth and placed unceremoniously in the trunk of his car. As he drove back to the apartment he shared with Isabel, his mind raced. His plans for wealth and a carefree life had evaporated in an instant, leaving him with nothing but anger and regret. When he arrived home, Isabel was waiting for him, her arms crossed. Well, she demanded, what did you get? Daniel hesitated, then gestured toward the mirror. That's it. That's all she left me. Isabel stared at him, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. Are you kidding me? I gave up everything for you and you bring back a mirror? It's not my fault, Daniel shouted. She screwed me over. No, Daniel, Isabel said coldly. You screwed yourself over. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Daniel was left alone in the empty apartment, the mirror leaning against the wall like a silent judge. He sank into a chair, staring at his reflection. For the first time, he truly saw himself, a man who had destroyed everything good in his life. The mirror, with its intricate silver frame, seemed to mock him, reflecting not just his face but the hollow shell of the person he had become. Sophia's plan was working. The apartment was eerily quiet. The antique mirror leaned against the wall, its ornate silver frame gleaming under the dim light of the living room. Daniel sat slumped in his chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at his reflection. He could barely recognize the man looking back at him. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his usually well-groomed hair was disheveled. The letter from Sophia sat open on the coffee table. Her words echoed in his mind, a chorus of regret, accusation, and an unsettling hope for his redemption. Beside the letter, the ultrasound photo Olivia had slipped to him at the will reading served as a haunting reminder of the child he never knew. He had stared at it for hours, the grainy image burning into his memory. Sophia's final words cut deeper than he could have imagined. The mirror isn't just for reflection, Daniel. It's for truth. Daniel's downfall was swift and unforgiving. The revelations of his betrayal had spread like wildfire through the social circles of Manhattan. Colleagues, friends, and acquaintances who once admired him now avoided him, their judgmental whispers filling the void left by his collapsing facade. The real estate deals that had once defined his career began falling apart as former partners pulled out and clients refused to work with him. Isabel's departure added another layer of isolation. She had taken what little dignity he had left when she stormed out, furious that the riches she expected were never coming. Her final message, a terse text saying, "You're on your own now," had been a devastating punctuation mark on their failed affair. With no inheritance, no career, and no relationships to lean on, Daniel was forced to sell his apartment to cover mounting debts. The penthouse, the cars, and the luxury lifestyle he had cultivated all vanished within weeks. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens, a far cry from the Upper East Side address he once called home. The antique mirror now hung in his cramped apartment, positioned directly opposite his bed. Sophia's instructions ensured it was the first thing he saw in the morning and the last thing he faced at night. It was impossible to escape the haunting reflection of his choices. Every glance at the mirror brought flashes of memories, the moments he had ignored Sophia's calls, the whispered promises he had made to Isabel, the vacations he had taken with her while Sophia fought for her life. The mirror was relentless, forcing him to confront his actions without mercy. But it wasn't just the mirror. Sophia's carefully crafted plan had ensured Daniel couldn't escape the full weight of his betrayal. The cancer research wing she funded was under construction at Mount Sinai, and the local press regularly featured stories about her legacy. Each article highlighted her generosity and strength, contrasting it with Daniel's betrayal. His name was mentioned sparingly, but always with the same undertone of contempt. Daniel's phone buzzed one morning, breaking the oppressive silence of his apartment. It was a text from Claire. Dr. Patel at Mount Sinai asked if you'd consider speaking at the opening ceremony for the oncology wing. They want you to share your story as a cautionary tale. Don't answer right away. Think about it. He stared at the message, torn between shame and obligation. The idea of standing in front of a crowd, exposing his darkest moments, was unbearable. Yet somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that it might be a step toward redemption. Daniel reluctantly agreed to attend therapy, another condition Claire had set for her limited support. His therapist, Dr. Morrison, was a soft-spoken but incisive woman who refused to let him deflect responsibility. "Why do you think Sophia left you the mirror?" she asked during one session, her pen poised over a notepad. "To punish me," Daniel replied bitterly. "Or," Dr. Morrison countered, "to save you. Reflection isn't about punishment, Daniel. It's about awareness. She wanted you to see the man you are so you could become the man you should be." The words stayed with him long after the session ended. That night, as he stared into the mirror, he whispered to himself, "Who am I?" For the first time, he didn't turn away. Months passed, and Daniel began to rebuild his life. He found a modest job as a leasing agent at a small property management firm in Brooklyn. The position was a far cry from his former glory, but it was honest work. His boss, Mr. Turner, knew his story and offered the job reluctantly, making it clear that any hint of dishonesty would result in immediate termination. Daniel worked quietly, keeping his head down and avoiding personal conversations. His colleagues were polite but distant, their trust in him non-existent. It was a humbling experience, but he threw himself into the work, determined to prove he was capable of change. The opening ceremony for the Sophia Reed Memorial Oncology Wing was a turning point. Dressed in a suit he had bought at a discount store, Daniel stood backstage, clutching a speech he had written and rewritten a dozen times. Claire approached him, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said softly. "No one would blame you for walking away." Daniel shook his head. "I need to, for Sophia." When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding. The crowd was silent as he approached the podium, their eyes filled with curiosity and skepticism. "My name is Daniel Reed," he began, his voice trembling. "I was Sophia Reed's husband, and I betrayed her in every way imaginable." He spoke about his affair, his neglect, and the financial betrayal that compounded Sophia's suffering. He didn't sugarcoat his actions or seek sympathy. Instead, he laid bare the truth, acknowledging the pain he had caused and the consequences he had faced. "Sophia didn't leave me the mirror to punish me," he concluded, his voice steady now. "She left it to remind me every day of the man I was and the man I need to become. I will never undo the harm I caused, but I can try to honor her memory by being better, by helping others, and by facing the truth, no matter how painful." The audience was silent for a moment, then the applause began, soft at first, but growing louder. Daniel stepped away from the podium, his heart heavy, but his resolve strengthened. The ceremony marked the beginning of a new chapter. Daniel started volunteering at Mount Sinai, working with patients and families navigating the challenges of cancer treatment. The experience was both humbling and healing, allowing him to contribute to Sophia's legacy in a meaningful way. Each morning before heading to the hospital or work, Daniel stood before the mirror and repeated a mantra he had written. "I cannot change the past, but I can choose who I am today." The mirror, once a symbol of his shame, became a tool for transformation, a constant reminder of the power of reflection and the possibility of redemption. After the event, Daniel was approached by the hospital's volunteer coordinator. "Your story," she said hesitantly, "could help others. Would you consider volunteering here, talking to families, maybe even patients?" At first, the idea terrified him. What could he, a man who had failed so spectacularly, offer to people fighting for their lives? But as he spent more time at the hospital, he realized that his experiences, however flawed, could serve as a reminder of the importance of loyalty, compassion, and presence. Daniel began volunteering every weekend. He helped with small tasks, listened to patients' stories, and spoke to families about the challenges of supporting loved ones through illness. Each interaction became a step toward healing, not just for those he helped, but for himself. Through his work at the hospital, therapy with Dr. Patterson, and Claire's guarded but consistent support, Daniel began to rebuild. The mirror in his apartment remained a constant presence, forcing him to confront his reflection every day. But over time, he saw something different in its silver frame. Not just the man he had been, but the man he was trying to become. Sophia's legacy lived on in the oncology wing, in the lives it touched, and in the redemption Daniel sought. Not for absolution, but to honor the woman who had believed in his potential, even when he had forgotten it himself. The morning light bathed the Vermont countryside in soft golden hues as Daniel parked his modest sedan in the driveway of the house Sophia had loved so deeply. This was the home they had purchased together years ago, dreaming of peaceful weekends and eventual retirement. It had remained untouched since her passing, a place filled with memories and whispers of a life that could have been. Daniel hadn't returned here since her death, and now, with the house set to be sold, Claire had offered him one final visit. As he stepped out of the car, the crisp mountain air filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the stuffy city atmosphere he had grown accustomed to. The garden, once meticulously tended by Sophia, was now overgrown but still charming, wildflowers blooming in places she had likely never imagined. He could almost see her kneeling in the soil, gloves on, humming softly as she worked. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender, Sophia's favorite scent. Her touch was everywhere. The throw pillows she had embroidered, the books she had stacked neatly on the shelves, even the half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the sunroom table. Daniel ran his fingers along the arm of the couch, memories flooding back with each step. They had spent so many evenings here, laughing, dreaming, simply being. In the corner of the living room stood Sophia's piano, a fixture she had insisted on despite Daniel's initial objections. He had always thought it was impractical, but Sophia had loved it, playing softly in the evenings. Daniel sat on the bench and pressed a single key. The note hung in the air, a haunting reminder of the music that had once filled this space. Daniel carried the antique mirror with him into the house, placing it carefully on the dining table. It had become a constant companion over the past year, a silent observer of his slow and painful journey. He glanced at his reflection, expecting the familiar wave of regret, but this time something felt different. The man staring back at him still bore the scars of his mistakes, but there was also a glimmer of purpose, a hint of redemption. In the master bedroom, Daniel found Sophia's journal, the one she had kept before her illness. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he had the right to delve so deeply into her private thoughts. But as he read, he felt closer to her than he had in years. Her entries spoke of hope, love, and unwavering belief in the goodness of people, even him. One passage caught his attention. "I believe in second chances, not because people deserve them, but because we all need them. Life is too short to let mistakes define us. Love, even when it hurts, is always worth it." Daniel closed the journal and pressed it to his chest, tears streaming down his face. Sophia's faith in him had never wavered, even when he had given her every reason to lose it. Now, it was up to him to honor her legacy, to make her belief in second chances a reality. After leaving Vermont, Daniel threw himself into his work at the Cancer Research Wing, now officially named the Sophia Grant Memorial Center. The center had quickly become a beacon of hope for patients and families, offering cutting-edge treatments, support groups, and holistic care. Daniel volunteered regularly, assisting patients with small tasks, organizing events, and sharing his story as a cautionary tale during family counseling sessions. His speeches were raw and unvarnished, drawing from the darkest moments of his life. He spoke not as a hero, but as a man who had fallen and was trying to rise again. Patients and families appreciated his honesty, finding solace in the fact that even someone as flawed as Daniel could strive for redemption. Claire, who had initially kept her distance, began to attend his talks. She watched as her brother transformed from a man consumed by regret to someone actively working to make amends. Their relationship, once fractured beyond recognition, began to mend. They started having lunch together, discussing Sophia, the center, and their shared memories. "You're finally becoming the man Sophia believed you could be," Claire told him one day over coffee. "She'd be proud." Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I just hope it's not too late." As the center grew, so did its impact. Thousands of patients received care each year, their lives touched by Sophia's vision of compassion and dignity. Daniel found fulfillment in small moments: a patient's smile after a difficult treatment, a family's gratitude for a kind gesture, a child laughing in the playroom. He also took on a mentorship role, guiding new volunteers and sharing lessons from his own journey. Many of them came to see him as a source of inspiration, proof that mistakes didn't have to define a person forever. But Daniel never let himself forget the pain he had caused. The mirror remained a fixture in his life, a constant reminder of where he had been and where he was going. It wasn't about self-punishment anymore. It was about staying grounded, about never forgetting the lessons he had learned. 1 year after his visit to Vermont, Daniel stood on the stage of the Memorial Center's annual gala. The event was a celebration of the center's achievements and a fundraiser for its future. Claire, now a key board member, had insisted he speak as part of the evening's program. As he looked out at the crowd, Daniel felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people carrying Sophia's legacy forward, ensuring that her dream of helping others would live on. He took a deep breath and began. "I am not here tonight as a perfect man," he said, his voice steady. "I am here as someone who failed spectacularly, who lost everything because of his own choices. But I am also here as someone who learned, through the grace of an extraordinary woman, that it is never too late to change." He spoke about Sophia's unwavering belief in second chances, about the mirror she had left him, and about the journey that had brought him to this moment. By the time he finished, the room was silent, the audience hanging on his every word. After the event, a young woman approached him, her eyes brimming with tears. "My mother was treated here," she said. "She always talked about how much this place felt like home. Thank you for helping make that possible." Daniel smiled, his heart full. "It wasn't me," he replied. "It was Sophia. I'm just doing my best to honor her." As the years passed, Daniel continued to rebuild his life. He remained deeply involved with the center, finding purpose in its mission and solace in the community it created. He also began to forge new relationships, cautiously opening his heart to the possibility of love again. The house in Vermont was eventually sold, but Daniel made a point to visit its new owners, a young family who shared Sophia's love of gardening. They promised to keep her beloved roses blooming, a gesture that brought him a sense of peace. Though the mirror still hung in his home, its role had changed. It was no longer a source of pain, but a symbol of transformation, a testament to the power of reflection and the possibility of redemption. Every morning Daniel looked into it and asked himself the same question: who will I be today? And every evening he looked again, not to dwell on his mistakes, but to honor the woman who had believed he could be better. In the end, Daniel's life became a living tribute to Sophia's legacy, a story not of perfection but of perseverance, growth, and the enduring power of love. If Sophia's story and Daniel's transformation has touched your heart, remember this: the power of reflection is not just in seeing who we are, but in envisioning who we can become. Change is always possible, no matter how far we've fallen, and sometimes it takes facing the hardest truths to rediscover the light within. If you're inspired by stories of redemption, resilience, and the strength to grow beyond mistakes, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us for more tales that move, inspire, and remind us of the power of hope. Click on the next video to continue the journey. Together, let's reflect, grow, and move forward.